Hello everyone. So today I want to talk about how actually the adipose tissue regulates whole body energy metabolism, because we spoke before that there are different compartments in our body that regulates energy expenditure, and lean body mass by far is the best predictor of whole body energy expenditure. However, the white adipose tissue also plays a crucial role in determining metabolic rate. I think when we say this, it's easy to understand the idea that lean body mass, because there's muscle, there's liver, brain, kidney, heart, all these different organs, we learned that they have a much higher metabolic rate than the adipose tissue. So it's easy to accept the idea that lean body mass regulates or determines, or if you were to predict energy expenditure, you would probably go directly into the lean body mass to predict energy expenditure or metabolic rate. But the adipose tissue plays a role in this also. It's an organ that, even though it has low metabolic rate, it has the ability to determine or regulate how lean body mass actually becomes more or less active. So let's get into this and actually address the question of how does the adipose tissue regulate energy expenditure. So I have this diagram that I think kind of summarizes the whole story. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start down here at the bottom of the diagram where we talk about adipose tissue. So in the middle we have, in yellow here, the central circle that we call adipose tissue is what everybody has in terms of number of cells, of adipocytes, and cells where you can actually store energy. So there are two possibilities that we have when we learned that when we are under energy balance conditions, the adipose tissue mass stays the same. In other words, what you're spending and what you're ingesting is similar, so the adipose tissue is pretty much the same. So there is no change. But there are two conditions that we also discussed. One is called positive energy balance, and the other one is negative energy balance. In other words, in positive energy balance is when we gain fat or we gain weight. Negative energy balance is what we want to achieve to lose weight. So in the center of this is obviously the adipose tissue, because the adipose tissue can either get bigger or get smaller. So the adipose tissue undergoes these modifications depending on how much energy is available in your body. So it can go either increase in its size or it can reduce its size. So, and then what happens is that let's start with the energy balance condition in the center, and let's go first with the positive energy balance. So which means what happens when we gain weight? So if you eat lots of food and there is a surplus of energy, your adipose tissue actually expands, so it becomes bigger. So it goes from the center to the left here in this diagram. So it's the positive energy balance situation. So what happens is that the adipose tissue, even though it has very low metabolic rate, what happens is that it produces hormones. It can actually communicate with higher centers and actually send information to your brain, for instance, and say, look, there is enough energy, there is an abundance of energy, or other way around, it can communicate the lack of energy or reduction in energy availability. So what happens is that, again, going from the energy balance condition to the positive energy balance, what we have is that the fat cells, they grow in size, so they become bigger. So as they get bigger, they release hormones. And I think probably one of the most well-known or well-studied hormones that regulate metabolism is what we call leptin. Leptin comes from the Greek root meaning leptos or lean. So what it does is that once your adipose tissue expands, it increases the production of leptin, of this hormone, and releases it in the circulation. So now in the circulation, the concentration of leptin increases and it travels to the brain, and the brain has many different areas that control food intake. But the hypothalamus specifically is where most of the controlling mechanisms are located. So this is this circle in the middle here, or this oval in the middle here that we call sympathetic nervous system, So what happens is that in the hypothalamus, it has two centers. One center that controls satiety and energy expenditure, and another center that controls hunger and energy expenditure also. So, but in both cases, what it does is leptin, when the adipose tissue grows in size, leptin travels to the brain and tells the brain, oh, look, there is plenty of energy. So if that's the case, so in an attempt of your body to actually regulate your body weight or maintain your body weight relatively constant, it activates leptin, activates what we call catabolic centers. And the catabolic centers is where actually you promote satiety. So what happens is leptin in the hypothalamus, specifically in areas specifically related to body weight control, what it does is promote satiety. Why is it? Because, well, if you have lots of energy, you don't need to eat more. So in response to leptin, a normal person, what happens is that the catabolic center is activated, promotes satiety, so you tend to eat less, you don't feel hungry, so you don't want to eat more. And at the same time, it also increases energy expenditure. And how does it do that? It does that by increasing sympathetic nervous system activity. So it makes you spend more energy by activating or making your lean body mass more active and less efficient. In other words, if you have lots of energy, there is no reason for you to be economic here or for you to be efficient. So it lowers efficiency, so you spend more energy, and in an attempt of your body to try to bring your energy stores back to what is considered normal, to what you were actually set up to have as you grew and developed throughout life. So actually we have this idea that your adipose tissue is determined by the number of cells you're going to have, and how big or small the adipose tissue is actually set by this set point theory, which depends on how your brain was actually set to establish how much energy you should have or how much fat you should store in your body. So your adipose tissue, every time that it goes bigger or grows bigger than what is this set point, or is this is pre-established or pre-programmed amount of fat that you should have, then you increase the release of leptin. Leptin travels to your brain, activates the catabolic center, and the catabolic center is basically mediated, or the activity of this center is basically mediated by CRH, which means corticotropin releasing hormone, which is a neurochemical that actually activates, promotes satiety, and leads to increases in energy expenditure. So in normal situations, what happens is that if you eat a little bit more and if you gain a little bit of fat, normally, especially in young people, what happens is that leptin is released and it kind of promotes satiety and energy expenditure in an attempt to bring your body weight back to what was previously established. So again, that's why I say the adipose tissue plays a very important role in regulating energy expenditure, because depending on how much fat you have stored in your body, it communicates, it sends a message to your brain, specifically to the hypothalamus, and obviously in that area you can now regulate what's going on with all the other organs in your body, which make up actually the lean body mass. And this includes liver, heart, kidneys, skeletal muscle. So all these different organs, they respond to a certain extent to the sympathetic nervous system, and this sympathetic nervous system can be activated when you have an abundance of energy in your body. So this is the side of the system that is regulated when you have a positive energy balance. So now let's go the opposite now. Let's say you have a certain amount of body weight and you want to lose weight. So what you do is and this is the idea that we usually promote, we say, well, we need to acquire a negative energy balance. In other words, you need to spend more and eat less. So in this way, you're going to always be in a deficit of energy. So if you're in a deficit of energy, you're going to take this deficit from somewhere, and it comes from the adipose tissue. So in the long term, so if you go on a diet, after a couple of days, 3, 4, or even weeks, what happens is that your adipose tissue starts to shrink. So what happens is that when the adipose tissue shrinks, leptin production goes down. So now what happens is that your hypothalamus senses it, because it responds to leptin when it's up. But when leptin is removed, or if leptin drops a lot, it misses. There is no signal of leptin anymore. So it senses that what happens is that if leptin went down, the hypothalamus is capable of sensing it and say, well, there is a lack or reduction in energy availability in the system. So what now it happens is that if you remove leptin from the equation, or if you reduce drastically leptin, so now you open up for the anabolic centers in your brain to, or in your hypothalamus, to become activated. And the anabolic means that the catabolic breaks down and activates depletion of energy. The anabolic actually stimulates the buildup of energy. So what is the idea here? Is to bring back the adipose tissue again. If you lost fat, you want to bring it back to what it was originally. Again, that predetermined or pre-programmed amount of fat that each person has. Differently, each person differs from one another, but it's believed that everybody has a certain amount of fat that is what communicates with your brain, and obviously controls your energy expenditure, hunger, and satiety. So in this case, when adipose tissue reduces, leptin goes down, and then the anabolic center is activated. And the anabolic center is mediated basically by another neurochemical called neuropeptide Y. So if leptin goes down, neuropeptide Y goes up. So when this NPY goes up, you feel hungry. And also what it does is that it suppresses sympathetic nervous system activity, and it reduces energy expenditure. Again, what the adipose tissue is doing here is, when you have an abundance of energy, it says spend a lot because you don't have any restriction. There is no lack, or there is no restriction or limitation in how much energy you have available. You can spend a lot. Now here, when you have limited amount of energy available, now the anabolic center activates, and then what it says is like, let's eat more. Why? Because if you're hungry, you're going to eat more. Eating more, you're going to bring in more energy. But at the same time, it tells your lean body mass to actually reduce energy expenditure. So again, it goes to your heart, liver, muscle, kidneys. All these organs that make up lean body mass tend to reduce its energy expenditure, and this is because of the activation of an anabolic center in the sympathetic, in the hypothalamus, which suppresses the activity of the sympathetic nervous system. So you have two sides or two arms of this system: one that detects abundance of energy, and one that detects low amount or limited supply of energy. So what happens is your body's constantly responding to those two arms, or adapting to these two conditions via these two arms of communication that exist between the adipose tissue and the brain. And it does so by releasing hormones that communicate with the brain. So this is the physiological mechanism that regulates your body weight. So that's why it's very difficult, once you lose weight, to maintain weight loss. And the reason for this is because what your adipose tissue is telling, or the message that is coming from the adipose tissue to your brain, is that you need to increase energy availability. How do you do that? Well, first you try to eat more, and that's where hunger comes into play. Now, and if that doesn't really solve the problem, you still have another way of doing this, which is reducing energy expenditure. Remember, that's why I said that there is an adaptive response of diet-induced thermogenesis. I don't know if we remember when we discussed this. Why is it so important? Because your body has the capacity to adjust its energy expenditure basically in response to how much energy is available in the system. So this two arms, in association with the central control that is performed by the hypothalamus, allows your body to maintain your body weight relatively constant throughout time. The problem is that this is not only pure these two components that actually regulate it, because we have also the brain as a whole, not only the hypothalamus, but the brain. It also receives influences from external information. So you can actually override these mechanisms here, these physiological mechanisms that depend on adipose tissue size and communication with the hypothalamus. You can override by voluntarily eating more or eating less. What do I mean? I mean, here's this. You may, for instance, you can have a meal where you eat a lot. You're full. You have plenty of food in you, and you're still there is no need for you to eat anymore. So you're satisfied with food. You should be satiated, but you can still eat more. For instance, if somebody finish a meal and somebody gives you a box of chocolate or comes with a very tasteful dessert, you're going to go and override, even though you don't need that food, or you're not hungry at all, but you always have room for dessert, as we say. Why is this? Because you can override these physiological mechanisms and actually eat more than what you should. So it's very easy to override this mechanism. It can go either way. For instance, if you can eat more even though you are not hungry at all, and you can keep actually adding more energy to the system. So again, you can acquire a positive energy balance, even though your system is sending information to your brain. So look, we have enough, but you by your voluntary control, you can say, well, I'm going to continue eating. So you eat more than what you need. So this is what we call hedonic eating, which is the fact that you've had previous experiences. You know that if you look at ice cream and you know that it tastes good, so just by looking at it, that just by visualizing a big portion of ice cream, you just get, yeah, I'm going to have that. Or you have a cake, or you have chocolate. So these are all things that you've tried before and you know they're good. So this external cues actually give you the pleasure of eating more. So then you override these physiological mechanisms and you end up having a positive energy, or enforcing or continuing with a positive energy balance. And this is what your body's trying to spend more energy, because it really activates through the sympathetic nervous system. It increases energy expenditure, but again, there is only so much. There is a certain limit of how much your body can increase energy expenditure. But if you go over that, because you can eat a lot more than what your body is increasing energy expenditure, that you end up either gaining weight or maintaining that weight gain that you had over time. So it's very easy for you to override this mechanism here. The other way around is not as simple, because when you reduce it and you're hungry all the time, so it's very easy for you to just respond to hunger and then eat to try to bring back your body weight. So the issue with someone, and this is the reason why it's so difficult for people who lost weight and maintain it, is because your body's constantly fighting against it to bring it back to what was previously established, or to what your normal, if you will, body weight would be. So again, you have this physiological mechanism that has plays a very important role in regulating your body weight, but you can also receive information from other brain areas that also influence how much you're willing to eat, which is what we call hedonic eating, depending on what kind of experiences you had with food before. If it is rewarding, you're going to try to get more. If you don't like it, if it's not tasteful, you probably won't eat. But things that you know that are tasteful, you're going to probably eat more, even though your body does not require, or there is no need for energy anymore. The signals are going to your brain, but you override it. And there is also the opposite of this. See, there are situations where people have some psychological alterations, and what they say is, I'm not going to eat at all even though I am hungry. And there are cases where people have anorexia nervosa or bulimia, where they eat but then they regret the eating and then they puke, or they just don't eat at all. And that is what anorexia nervosa is a typical condition. Again, the system is trying to, your adipose tissue is shrinking, and you're trying to, you're hungry, you want to eat. But the problem is that for some psychological dysfunctional alteration or some psychological issues, you actually override also the signal to increase energy intake or hunger. So what happens is you've voluntarily override the system in both ways. Obviously, it's a lot more common for you to see people gaining weight than people losing weight or developing anorexia nervosa, even though there is quite a few cases nowadays of both. But I think we have an epidemic, if you will, of obesity, but we don't have an epidemic of anorexia nervosa, even though both are very important. I don't want to downplay either of them, but just in terms of numbers, obesity by far is much more common, much more prevalent in the population than anorexia nervosa or problems associated with psychological or voluntary suppression of eating. So in that, again, these are just two different conditions that show that you can override this physiological system here that I summarized by this diagram here. It's a lot more complex, if you will, because I only spoke about leptin, but there are many other hormones that come from the adipose tissue. There are a lot of different interactions between different hormones that actually make this a lot more complex. What I'm trying to do here is just to give you an example of how an organ that apparently with very little metabolic activity, what I mean by this is that it spends very little energy, how it can actually control other organs that make up your lean body mass, that have a lot of them that contribute, that regulate or basically determine your metabolic rate indirectly. And it does so, again, by sending this information from the amount of energy that you have in your cells, in your fat cells, to your brain. And then the brain is like the central regulator that will determine what's going on in all these different organs and tissues. Again, we usually don't talk much about this. We don't push too much emphasis, because when we talk about body weight, and if it's weight loss, we think, oh, you need to spend more and intake less. Well, it seems very simple, but it's not as simple, because your body is not just simply sitting down and allowing it to happen, because there are adaptive mechanisms. That's when adaptive thermogenesis come into play, or adaptive thermogenesis come into play, because it allows your body to adjust itself in terms of energy expenditure, either one way or another. So leptin is one hormone, but there is a whole bunch of other ones. I don't want to go through all of them, but leptin is probably one that is the most well known and studied. And there is a lot that we learned since the discovery of leptin. So the adipose tissue nowadays is not just a simple energy storage compartment. It's a lot more than that. It has the ability. It's actually seen as an endocrine organ, because it sends information to the brain and allows there's specific centers in the hypothalamus to control either hunger, energy expenditure. So if there is an abundance of energy, there's no reason for you to be economic or efficient. So you spend a lot. But if you are in a state of deprivation of energy, your body will try to, okay, let's spend less. It's a protective mechanism, and tries to keep your energy expenditure lower, and also promotes hunger, because hunger means that you're going to look for food, you're going to try to eat more, which is going to bring energy in again. So that way you regulate the system. It's important to understand this. This, I would say, regulatory mechanism was established as humans evolved, because if we go back in time, we didn't have availability of energy all the time. So you had to be able to respond to conditions where you had an abundance of energy, but you also had periods of restricted availability of energy. So then your body had to have some kind of mechanism that could adjust your energy expenditure, so when you had availability or abundance, you would thrive. But you're not dying when you have restriction of energy. So your body could adjust or adapt depending on what kind of circumstances you were exposed to. So again, if we go back in time during evolution of human beings, we had to do this because we didn't have a grocery shop around the corner that you can go there and buy food every time that you want, or you don't have availability of food every day of the year, regardless of the season. So if it's summer, winter, spring, fall, you always have a food available in abundance, so you can always eat more. But we have evolved in a situation where none of this was available. The problem is that nowadays we still have the adaptive mechanism. The system is still in place, the physiology is still in place, but now we screwed up everything, because now we put food in large availability with high energy, lots of processed foods, and with high density, energy density, so you can eat with relatively small amounts of food. You can get lots of calories or lots of energy in this relatively small amounts of food. So what happens is that even though we still have this evolutionary mechanism that protects our body against both ways, weight gain and weight loss, within a limited, obviously, capacity. It's not unlimited. It's not that we can increase. For instance, if you're eating a lot, you're going to spend 3-4 times more to compensate for. It's not like that. You can maybe 30-40% increases in energy expenditure, and you can also reduce energy expenditure by 3-50%, depending on 30-50%, depending on each person is different, but within that range. Now, but you can pretty much eat nothing, and at the same time you can eat 10,000 calories. So you cannot go. Your system is not capable of overcoming completely the surplus of energy. It adjusts. It has some room to play, but we have to. It's to a certain extent limited on to how far it can go in terms of adjusting both ways. And that's why you can gain weight despite this mechanism is in place, and you can lose weight despite of adaptive responses, in which is making you more efficient. So what you have to be able to is to identify how you can play with this and what is the best approach for you to manage these mechanisms in a way that you keep your body weight within a relative narrow range, or oscillating very little, because you can control it, and you have to be able to manage this in a way that even though the system is in operation, you still need to be careful, because there is only so much it can go both ways. Okay, so this is the story about the adipose tissue and how an organ that has relatively low metabolic rate can regulate your whole body energy expenditure, and it does so by, again, endocrine signals, by hormones that are released in the circulation, talk to your brain, and then your hypothalamus can actually sense what direction to go. Is it going to activate the catabolic center, or it's going to activate the anabolic center? It will depend on all the signals coming from the adipose tissue being kind of centralized in the hypothalamus, and that is where all the signals are sensed, and then an outcome or an output information will go. Can either promote satiety and energy expenditure, or can promote hunger and reduce energy expenditure. It will depend on the size of your adipose tissue and the information that it sends to your brain. With that, we're stopping here. We'll continue next time. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.